I think the isolationists are doing the president a real disservice by undercutting his leverage.
Welcome back to
Ami's house.
All right, today diving right in with people who know a lot more than we do. We have Mark Dubowitz, Chief Executive from the Foundation of Defense of Democracies. He's also the host of the Iran Breakdown, a podcast that unpacks everything Iran. It couldn't be more timely than right now. He's been sanctioned by Iran and Russia. That's pretty badass, more than we can say for ourselves. Mark Dubowitz, welcome to the show.
Thank you wonderful to be here. Thanks, Ami. And thanks, Michael.
Okay. So, look, I've seen Argo. Michael, you've seen Argo. So we
sure have.
So we kind of know a little bit about what's going on in the region. But I think that reflects about the extent to which the general population of people who are commenting, especially online, on Twitter, about what's going on in Iran, in Israel and Iran currently, as it comes into the spotlight. The extent of people's knowledge is we're at a time now where people have a lot of takes and opinions about things and really not a lot of informed authority or knowledge about the situation. So just for some house cleaning, like a quick 2-minute cleanup here. When people talk about the Iranian regime versus the people of Iran, the current Islamic Republic of Iran, just going back a little bit in history to 1979, what was Iran before the Iranian regime as we currently know it? What could it possibly be after in terms of the goals of this war? Just give us a quick overview of how Iran came to be where it is today in conflict with Israel and in conflict with the West.
So Iran, before 1979, was under the Shah of Iran. It was a monarchy. There was no doubt it was an authoritarian state, but it was peaceful. It was prosperous. It was growing economically. And it actually had good relationships with the United States. It had good relationships with Israel. And then the Islamic Revolution happened in 1979, and the Islamists came into power. Ayatollah Khomeini was the supreme leader. And he, in the beginning, actually opposed the Shah, and it was a coalition of kind of red and green. It was the Islamists with the sort of left-wing socialists, Marxists. But even though, Iranian secularists who really wanted to have more freedom, more human rights, more free speech rights, and they thought here's an opportunity to get rid of this authoritarian Shah. And Khomeini was very good at hiding his true intentions. So the Islamic Revolution happens. They take over. The Shah decides not to turn the Iranian army on these massive protests. Khomeini comes into power and then proceeds to execute everybody who is not an Islamist and drives the rest of them out of the country. And so then we have the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has been in power since 1979. Interesting, by the way, Argo is completely wrong. Argo actually talks about the fact that all these terrible things happened because in 1953, the CIA and MI6, they engineered this coup of this, quote, democratically elected Iranian Prime Minister Mossadegh. And as a result of that, that was kind of the original sin that led to the Islamic Revolution. All completely wrong. If you want to learn more about that, episode 2 of the Iran Breakdown with the great Iranian-American historian Ray Takei shows that, in fact, the CIA and MI6 played a big role in that. And it was actually, because this is relevant to today, it was actually a combination of the clerics and the business community who got sick of Mossadegh because he was a challenge to their authority and was also being intransigent and not being willing to do a deal with the British and the Americans over Iranian oil. So all relevant to today as we think about, is the Islamic Republic potentially going to go down and what would it take?
Well, first of all, Mark, if I've learned anything from history, ask Sam Harris. You don't want to piss off Ben Affleck on a podcast. He will come after you very, very hard. Where was Khomeini at the time in exile? When he came, where was he coming from?
Well, not surprisingly, he was in France.
Oh, I thought maybe LA, but yeah, came from France. And how did it's such an ominous parallel to today where you have this coalition of sort of the left-wing anti-establishment with the Islamism element of it in terms of how did he fool everybody? How was Khomeini presenting himself at the time that so many of these coalitions sort of fell for what would be a revolution that would be progressive or prosperous?
Yeah, I think his main arguments were one, Shah is a brutal authoritarian with Savak. He's intelligence services taking away your rights. 2 is the Islamic Republic promises you not only prosperity, but also respect for religion. The Shah doesn't respect religion. And I think 3, he was very, very good at hiding his ambitions. I am an Ayatollah. I am a quietist, meaning that I have no interest in political power. I'm interested in religion, and I'm a man of ideas, but I have no interest in ruling. We'll have a representative government. They will rule, and I will be quietly sitting in the background, thinking great thoughts. But of course, he hid all of that from his cohorts, and then came into power, set up a really brutal authoritarian regime with him as the supreme leader, dominating the entire Iranian government and every facet of Iranian life. So really brilliant in terms of taqiyya, as they say, in terms of deception. And I think his successors in the Islamic Republic have been equally adept at fooling, particularly Americans, about their true intentions.
And the current Ayatollah is his son who succeeded him.
Not his son. No, this is Ali Khamenei. He was the president of Iran at one point. He was kind of like a two-bit cleric. He didn't have really any serious credentials. But when Khomeini died, he managed to engineer a succession and took over power, and has been in power since 1989, longest serving leader in the world. Has survived and outmaneuvered multiple U.S. presidents and Israeli prime ministers and Western leaders, and until probably October 7th, was one of the most brilliant strategic thinkers, and playing kind of three-dimensional chess while the rest of us played checkers, and then boom, made a really tragic mistake on October 7th, at least for him and for the survival of his regime.
What was before we get into the next question, was the mistake not backing away from Hamas at that point, or for orchestrating October 7th? Because my understanding was Hamas didn't really coordinate so well with Iran on October 7th.
So the Iranians
that's way off.
Yeah, I mean, there were 3 meetings prior to October 7th in Damascus, in Beirut, and in Tehran. And at that meeting, every meeting with the Revolutionary Guards of Iran, who are the kind of shock troops of Khamenei, Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. In the meeting in Tehran, the supreme leader joined that meeting. And really, they were discussing a multi-front invasion of Israel. And the idea was that Hezbollah was going to go first from Lebanon, from the north, invade Israel, kill thousands of Israelis, take thousands of hostages. This was a much more sophisticated, well-trained, brutal terrorist army than Hamas. While they were going south, Hamas would come from the north and from the West Bank, and they would, under Iranian rocket fire and missile fire, they would sweep in and kill as many Israelis as possible, paralyze
Hezbollah or Hamas? I'm sorry, Hezbollah or Hamas?
Well, the idea was all of them would,
wow.
And it would be a coordinated invasion. Now, what happened is Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, decided on his own that he was going to jump the gun. And I think the view was, why should a Palestinian Sunni, right, defer to those Shiites in Lebanon and those Shiites in Persia, where they're going to get all the glory? I am Saladin, the great Muslim conqueror, and I am going to lead under a Palestinian flag a Sunni offense. And so he jumped the gun. I think he surprised Hezbollah and surprised Khamenei in Iran. And as a result, Hezbollah, even though they started launching rocket fire and missile fire at Israel, didn't activate their special Radwan forces for the invasion. And the Iranians all of a sudden took a step back because the United States rushed carrier strike groups to the Gulf. The Israelis rushed men and planes to the north. Hezbollah was deterred. Iran was deterred. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad were on their own. And then the Israelis went in there and started to eviscerate Hamas's capabilities. So that was the mistake that was made. And since then, I think it's been a tough, grinding, almost 2 years war, with obviously a lot of casualties, and very difficult for Israel. But the Israelis have gone on offense in ways that have been really remarkable, and we can talk about all that.
It sounds like there was like a sort of sense of possible Sunni pride in wanting to take out the Yahud over a coordinated effort that animated Sinwar, at least, or something. That's what I've heard too. That for him there was something else sort of ultimately motivating him than needing to coordinate with Iran and the regime.
No, I mean, motivated by, by being the guy that is going to destroy Israel, and
Right.
motivated by Sunni pride, but mostly Palestinian pride. Like, we, the Palestinians,
We
have sacrificed. We are the ones that deserve the great victory, not those Shiites in Lebanon, Hezbollah, or the Persian Shiites of the Revolutionary Guards, or those clowns in Yemen, the Houthis. We are the ones that are going to lead the way, and jumps the gun, and then Israel's able to, after a brutal October 7th, get back on its feet, eviscerate Hamas, hammer Hezbollah in just, a series of coordinated strikes, the beepers, the walkie-talkies, the killing of Nasrallah, the taking out of the entire Radwan leadership, the destruction of anywhere between 60, 70% of their rockets and their missiles. The Iraqi Shiite militias pause. They don't get involved in the fight. The Houthis do. They start firing ballistic missiles at Israel. But this keeps going on. And then the Iranians, in response to Israeli strikes on key IRGC commanders that are coordinating this entire offensive against Israel, in April and October of last year, they fire ballistic missiles at Israel. The Israeli Air Force goes in there, takes out their strategic air defenses, and now we get to where we are today. We can talk about what triggered this, but Israel has been on offense against this ring of fire, this axis of resistance or axis of misery that Khamenei had built, and he's watching it just crumble before his eyes.
Right. So coming to here and now, it just seems like so many people out there have such short memories, because even the way it's framed in people who are speaking favorably about Israel, they talk about Israel attacks Iran, or even Israel preemptively strikes against Iran. But can you provide some insight as to how, in what way Israel is responding to what's been going on, to the extent to which Iran has been at war with Israel? And also why at this very moment, why not a month ago? Why not a month from now? What was this singular thing that changed that prompted Israel to have to do this now? And to what extent is this actually retaliatory and not an actual first act of aggression, the way it's being framed to make Israel look like the aggressor?
Yeah, if your historical memory is a week or 2 weeks or a month or 2 years, right, then you can frame this as, Israeli aggression. I mean, if you're a little bit more historical and you understand October 7th is what triggered everything, and that was the Iranian Axis invading Israel and killing 1,200 Israelis, Americans, taking 450 hostages, and the Israelis are responding to that. But if you have sort of more historical perspective on this, that the Islamic Republic has been at war against Israel for at least 45 years. And the Israeli mistake has always been to play defense, right? They've allowed the Iranian regime to build this axis of resistance, this ring of fire around them. And Khamenei has been using his terror proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Shiite militias, Houthis, other terrorist organizations, just to try grind Israel down in a never-ending war of attrition, using terrorism and drones and missiles and rockets, and trying to make life just unbearable for Israelis. And many wars have been fought, but the wars have been fought with what Naftali Bennett would call the tentacles of the octopus, right? The tentacles, and those are the proxies. And Israel's just been in this never-ending war for at least since probably 1982, if not earlier. But started in 1982 against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then repeated wars against Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad over the years. But it was only really in April of last year where the first direct confrontation occurs. And it occurs as a result of an Israeli recognition that they have got to go on offense. There will be more and more October 7th, as Hamas had promised, and as Khamenei had planned and built for, unless they take the offense, unless they escalate in order to de-escalate. And that is when they go in April, they go in October. And again, the Iranians are firing ballistic missiles at them. They're using their terrorist proxies and drones. We get to today. What Israel decides to do is they recognize that there is a window that is closing. And the window is closing is primarily on the nuclear weapons side. Right? For many years, there's been a huge debate whether Khamenei has green-lighted the Iranians to build a nuclear weapon. There's been a lot of talk about this fatwa that Khamenei had, the nuclear fatwa, where he made it a religious ruling that the Islamic Republic would not have nuclear weapons. Some people believed in it, many were skeptical of it. Iran built out its nuclear weapons infrastructure, but there was always this debate, particularly between the U.S. and intelligence community and the Israeli intelligence community, about whether Khamenei had actually given the green light to move towards a nuclear warhead. Well, the Israelis get intelligence that he has now given that green light. The weapons scientists are starting to work on the warhead, and the warhead is the last remaining element of a deliverable nuclear weapon. Right? The Iranians have 17 bombs worth of enriched uranium to 60%, which is basically almost weapons grade. They've got an inventory of 3,000 ballistic missiles. They're building intercontinental ballistic missiles to reach the United States. But the last thing they need is a warhead. And the warhead is fixed to the missile. You put in the uranium metal, you create a nuclear reaction, and that is the deliverable nuclear weapon. And the Iranians have now decided to move forward on that. And Prime Minister Netanyahu says, that is our trigger. We're going. And by the way, the window is also closing because the Iranians are rebuilding their strategic air defenses that Israel destroyed in October with Russian and Chinese help. And they also have a plan to massively increase their ballistic missile arsenal from 3,000 to 8,000 in 2 years to 20,000 in 5 to 6 years. At that point, Israel is done because even without a nuclear weapon, Khamenei could destroy Israel by firing hundreds and hundreds of ballistic missiles at Israel every day and destroying central Israel, killing thousands, tens of thousands of Israelis. And it's the end. And by having a nuclear weapon, he can threaten that he'll introduce tactical nuclear weapons into the battle space so that an American president tells an Israeli prime minister to tell the IDF chief of staff to stand down, therefore removing or at least severely limiting the IDF's conventional military response to Khamenei's war of attrition.
Did October 7th and the war over the past 18 months accelerate Iran's march towards this weapon? It almost sounds like without October 7th, Israel wouldn't have had the wherewithal to make this attack. But my question is, would Iran have moved this quickly towards a weapon without the circumstances in the Middle East right now?
Yeah, look, I think his plan always was to do it, and he was always careful. He wanted to build the nuclear infrastructure, create massive enrichment capability, right? Be able to have everything in place from an infrastructure point of view, and then the final decision to build the warhead. He always had to decide, if I go for the warhead, will I trigger an Israeli and/or American strike? That certainly is the Israeli red line. The American red line was less clear, but I think that over subsequent administrations, increasing the United States and Israel were on the same page that would be a nuclear breakout. So he always had to be careful about that, calibrate it, and make sure he built the infrastructure, both nuclear and ballistic missile infrastructure, to be in the position where he could then rush for the bomb. I think after October 7th, I think he decides that October 7th is a weapon of mass distraction for the Israelis, and now he can move forward in his weapon of mass destruction. And he begins to advance that program. And as he's taking more and more blows from the Israelis, right, he's realizing my axis of resistance has been almost eviscerated, and my strategic air defenses have been destroyed, and increasingly my only play is to go for the nuclear bomb. And so he advances that, gives the order to his nuclear weapons scientists, and they start moving. Mossad has deeply penetrated the highest echelons of his nuclear military and security establishment. They know, they get evidence of this, and this becomes, as I said, one of the triggers for the Israeli decision to launch a retaliatory strike against the Islamic Republic of Iran in response to all of these attacks against Israel and the movement towards nuclear weapons.
You got to feel bad for the scientists. I mean, the Revolutionary Guard folks, fine, but these were the nerdy kids in class, and they're just making them do it. No, I don't know. I
have a question about that.
Well,
actually, if you're a brilliant nuclear scientist, why would you go work for Iran?
I mean, you're there.
Like, why not anywhere else? Is that a crazy question?
Well, it's not a crazy question. I mean, first of all, these are the most dangerous men in Iran, right? I mean, these are the guys that have this technical skills to build the most devastating weapons. So, I mean, if I had a kill list in terms of complicity, they'd be number one on my list, even before the Guard Corps and the Basij and the military generals and the.
This is the brain power.
Well, these are the guys that are building the worst weapon. And so they made a decision, to your point, Michael, I'm going to devote my career to building a nuclear bomb. Now, they could have made a decision to do lots of other things with their scientific acumen. They could have also gone abroad. Many people left Iran. I mean, particularly after the 79 revolution, massive brain drain through the 80s and 90s, incredible scientific talent that, by the way, came to the United States. And, the only place where Iranians have not succeeded around the world is inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. They're incredible immigrants, very successful in science and medicine and business, and they're incredibly talented people. So those weapons scientists could have gotten jobs at MIT instead of Sharif University, which is the Iranian MIT.
Let it be known, Mark is not sympathetic to the engineers and scientists who stayed in Iran.
I am not sympathetic. That you could foot stomp that one.
So I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but this is an interesting question about people talking about how what is different about Iran possessing a nuclear weapon than, say, other nefarious actors on the world stage who are nuclear? Is it specifically, is their rhetoric and their posture uniquely threatening compared to, say, Pakistan, North Korea, these other actors in the region who we wouldn't say are good states or states that we can trust with nuclear weapons, but they do have them? You hear this case to be made that who's to say Iran having a nuke necessarily means immediate danger for Israel? Just make the case that why Iran is unique in terms of whether it's rhetoric over the years, its threats, its posture.
So let me make this sort of more technical, kind of historical argument first, and that is that Iran getting a nuclear weapon will set off a cascade of proliferation in the Middle East and even in the Indo-Pacific. And the reason for that is that Iran, because it is an aggressive revolutionary regime that not only threatens Israel, but is going after the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Bahrainis, Egyptians, Jordanians, and it's been an historic confrontation and competition with the Turks, that there is no doubt that if the Iranians get a nuclear weapon, all those other countries are going to move to nuclear weapons, right? Because there's no way that they're going to rely on a U.S. guarantee or a security umbrella to protect them from an Iranian nuclear bomb, and they will all move to that, and you will have 6-7 countries in the Middle East, all with nuclear weapons, and that is a proliferation nightmare. It's also a potential nightmare where by miscalculation or design, you end up with nuclear war, right? This is not the Cold War with the Soviets with a red phone, and we have a red phone, and it's some tense moments over Cuba and 73 war and 67 war, and we came pretty close, but there was always a red phone and another red phone, and we could talk to each other. And the Soviets were dangerous and destructive, but they weren't suicidal, and they believed in they were atheists, so they believed in the good life on this earth, not the next earth. I think that's in contrast to the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic theologically, and again, there are different factions within the Islamic Republic, but there is a strong faction within the Islamic Republic which are called Twelvers, who believe in the coming of the hidden Mahdi. That in order to get that, you need Armageddon, and then the hidden Imam will come back, and then there will be, Islamic domination over the world. When you got people with that kind of theology, you've got to be worried, because that is not the theology of the Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, and even the Pakistanis. I would argue even the North Koreans, right? And I can unpack that a little more. I mean, I don't think the Pakistanis believe that their nuclear weapon is something that will usher in the hidden Imam. I think they've developed a nuclear weapon. I worry about Pakistan's bomb. It is an Islamist government, but that was created as a deterrent to India. The North Koreans are bankrupt Stalinist regime. They don't have any regional or global aspirations, though they do have aspirations to take over South Korea. So if I'm the South Koreans, I'm very worried about a North Korean bomb. But the North Koreans are not going to use necessarily a nuke on the Korean peninsula. They're going to use a nuke to use their conventional power to destroy Seoul. North Korea, very dangerous. Pakistan, very dangerous. Islamic Republic of Iran, uniquely dangerous. And by the way, proliferation in the Middle East means proliferation in the Indo-Pacific, because every American president since Bill Clinton said Iran will never get a nuclear weapon. If Iran gets a nuclear weapon, everybody in the world says, I don't trust the American nuclear umbrella. The Japanese, the Taiwanese, perhaps the Singaporeans, the Filipinos, anybody who's worried about Chinese Communist Party power in the Middle East, or I should say in the Indo-Pacific, develops their own nuclear weapons. And now you've got a proliferation nightmare. I also would, one final thing, Netanyahu referred to this, and again, one never knows exactly how this would play out, but the idea that Iran could give nukes, crude nuclear devices to terrorist organizations should not be ruled out. Is that likely? Probably not. Could it happen? Absolutely. And that's a real danger, because it's almost impossible to deter suicidal terrorists with nukes. It's easy to deter states, not non-state actors.
Right, because they want to win and dominate, but they also don't care to have mass casualties, given the ideology of suicidality that is a part of that's built into the cake a little bit.
Remember,
they don't have the shared mutual destruction component.
That's true. I worry sometimes too. I mean, the Iranian president Rafsanjani, who was considered a pragmatist, and he once said that Israel's a one-bomb country. But we Iranians and Muslims can afford to lose tens of millions of people. We've got 1.5 billion people, and we can afford to lose tens of millions in order to destroy Israel. Now, that was the pragmatist that some Americans and Europeans thought was a moderate, and he was talking like that. Now, you might say, well, it's just crazy rhetoric. These guys are just going off the handle. I think for Israelis in particular, but I think Americans too, we should take what people say seriously. Because sometimes these men really mean it. They are also men of ideas. They actually believe in their ideas. We don't take it seriously because we think the entire world are material girls and material boys and just want money and live a good life. They're not material boys and girls. They are people who have strong ideas, ideologies, theologies, and they want to realize on that. And I think history is replete with examples where if we had just listened to what people said, we may have prevented wars that were devastating.
Right. So actually that shifts into the next area here, because we've made a very strong case that regionally speaking, as far as Israel goes, it's very hard to deny that Iran has posed this threat and these actions were necessary. So now you're seeing the split in sort of the MAGA right of the old sort of isolationist school that's come back. That's not only isolationist, but also fairly anti-Israel, really signaturely. To what extent has Iran been at war with the United States, or is a current threat to the United States? Because they're begging and claiming to beg to make that case. Don't drag America into this war. What is America's role here? And to what extent is, like you mentioned, intercontinental ballistic missiles, things of that nature? How is America threatened by Iran?
Well, first of all, the Islamic Republic has killed and maimed thousands of Americans since 1979. I mean, they've got so much American blood on their hands. So anybody who says that they're not a threat to Americans clearly hasn't been studying the history of Iranian warfare against America.
How have they done that specifically, sir? How have they done that specifically? Like in what instance, if you can name a few examples of that?
Well, they were behind the killing of and maiming of thousands of Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan. Through Hezbollah, they've killed and taken hostage Americans in Lebanon. They went after our Marines who were in Lebanon in the Beirut bombings. Our Marines were there as peacekeepers in 1981, and they killed them. They went after Americans in Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia. They've gone after. I mean, they try to blow up a restaurant just down the street from where I am right now in Georgetown to take out the Saudi ambassador. And of course, there were hundreds of Americans eating lunch that day who they would have killed, and it just goes on and on. I mean, but
besides that, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, exactly. Besides all that, they've certainly been at war with us. They also rhetorically, I mean, for Islamic Republic, we are the great Satan. Is death to America first, until death to Israel is second. Israel is the little Satan. Third, I think that people don't understand that the Iranians have a program, as I said, to build intercontinental ballistic missiles to deliver nuclear warheads. They don't need that for Israel. They don't need that for the Gulf. They don't need that for most of Europe. They need it in order to threaten the United States. Now, you might say, well, the Iranians are not crazy enough to launch nuclear-tipped ICBMs at New York and Washington. Now, that may be true, or it may not be true. But at the very least, what they are going to do is they're going to engage in nuclear blackmail. They're going to blackmail the United States because their goal is to drive us out of the Middle East. Their goal is to assert Iranian dominance in the Middle East. And their goal is to then, in this alliance that they have with China and Russia and North Korea, right, for those four countries to be the dominant powers, thereby not only reducing American influence, but badly constraining our ability to bring the kind of prosperity that we have to the United States for years. So it is their role singularly in terms of their willingness to kill Americans and their track record in killing Americans, their willingness to engage in nuclear blackmail of the United States, and the key role they play in this axis of aggressors with China, Russia, and North Korea, where they represent a threat. And again, I mean, I understand this resistance to endless wars, but I think what the Israelis have demonstrated is we are an ally willing to fight and die in our own defense, right, against the common enemy. We're not asking for American troops on the ground, right? We're not asking you, and they haven't asked us since October 7th, to defend them. What they're asking now is we have done all of the work over the past few days. We have destroyed Iranian air defenses. We have taken out the IRGC top echelons in military and security and intelligence. We've gone after key nodes of the Iranian nuclear program. We've destroyed Natanz. We've taken out Isfahan. We've taken out the 14 nuclear weapons scientists. We've basically created a situation now where the president can now fully dismantle Iran's nuclear weapons program and go down in history as the president who actually finally achieved what other presidents couldn't. Now President Trump needs to make a choice. He can either do that at the negotiating table, or he can do that by ordering the U.S. Air Force to fly B-2 bombers and drop these massive ordnance penetrators to take out the most hardened and remaining facility in Iran's nuclear weapons program. Now, if he doesn't do that and Iran gets a nuclear weapon, this is a devastating blow not only to the Israelis but to President Trump. And it'll be a permanent stain on his presidency, and I think it'll greatly undermine our ability to deal and deter and constrain these other enemies. And at that point, the Chinese know they can go for Taiwan without any fear that the United States is going to defend Taiwan, because with Taiwan, it is going to be American soldiers who are going to have to go in there and defend Taiwan. Taiwan is not Israel. They don't have the ability to fight the Chinese on their own. And that is, again, a massive blow. I also think for North Korea, that's an indication it's time to hit Seoul, take it out, and quote, unify the Korean Peninsula under their power. We could be left by the end of the Trump administration with results that certainly haven't made America great again. And America is no longer first, America second, third, or last. So I think the isolationists are doing the president a real disservice by undercutting his leverage. His leverage, not only his military leverage, but most importantly, if the president wants to get Khamenei back to the negotiating table and negotiate a peaceful end to this nuclear weapons program, then what you want to do is you want to make sure that Khamenei believes that President Trump is prepared to use American military power. Because if not, he won't be prepared to go back to the table and peacefully surrender his program. So these isolationist voices are making President Trump's choice even more difficult. And when Trump can't get them back to the negotiating table, then it means that this war is only going to escalate. And then the regional war, the World War III that they're warning about, becomes more likely, not less likely. So just to wrap up, The isolationists are making war more likely, not less likely, by undermining the president.
And what is the downside for America dropping one bomb on the nuclear facility? What's the argument against that?
Well, the argument against that would be, what would the Iranian reaction be, right? Is the Iranian reaction to that, okay, now they're going to close the Straits of Hormuz, now they're going to start going after U.S. troops in the region, are they going to launch terrorist attacks against Americans? Do they have sleeper cells? They do. In the United States, are they going to activate them? And all of a sudden, we start to escalate. And as they hit us, we have to hit them back. And as we hit them back, we start hitting them harder. They start responding harder, and now this thing starts to escalate out of control. Right? That would be if I was steelman the argument for them. That's their argument.
I was under the impression they were already after America.
They are after America. The question is, are they going to come after America massively? Now, I believe that argument is false, because I think the people making it, they don't quite understand that Khamenei, at the end of the day, prioritizes the survival of his regime over all else, including his nuclear weapons program. And the only thing he fears is the end of his regime. Now, a little bit of history, which is always interesting. Khamenei, I remember I said he succeeded Khomeini. And I remember I mentioned the name Rafsanjani, who was a former president of Iran. Rafsanjani and Khamenei went to Khomeini in the 1980s. Iran had fought a brutal 8-year war with Iraq. They had lost 1 million people on both sides. And Khomeini was doubling down, wanted to continue fighting. And at that time, by mistake, the United States shot down an Iranian passenger airliner. By mistake. Offered compensation and apologies. And Khamenei and Rafsanjani went to Khomeini and said, we all know that was not accidental. The Americans intended to do that. And that is a sign the Americans are about to intervene militarily against us. And we can take on Saddam, but we cannot take on the United States of America. We will lose our regime. And Khamenei and Rafsanjani said to Khomeini, this is a tough, tough choice, Mr. Supreme Leader, but you have to, quote, drink the poison chalice. Khomeini agreed and famously said, I drank the poison chalice, and I agreed to a ceasefire with his lifelong enemy, Saddam Hussein. I think Khamenei today is now, ironically, in the same position. Right? He's now facing a decision where, is he going to gamble, escalate, go after Americans, be in a position, break out for a nuclear weapon? Because in doing so, he runs the risk that the United States would intervene and take down his regime. Right? And all they have to do to take down his regime is just allow the Israelis to keep doing what they're doing. I mean, the Israelis are starting to take down the regime. I mean, decapitation strikes on all of the central nodes of this regime, including the internal repression apparatus that has been responsible for brutalizing Iranians who've been on the streets since 2009, millions of them yelling, death to the dictator. Are you President Obama, Biden, Trump? Are you with us or with the dictator? The Iranians are just itching to come back to the streets. They keep getting beaten down. But at some point, the regime is not going to have the resources and the capabilities to continue to defend its regime against its own people. And so there is a, quote, regime change scenario. It doesn't involve 500,000 mechanized U.S. troops invading Iran. It actually involves the Israeli Air Force doing what they're doing, Mossad doing what they're doing, and the Iranian people taking to their streets and taking back their country. And as long as Khamenei believes that, he is much more likely to drink the poison chalice, come back to Oman, and negotiate a deal with Trump that strips some of his nuclear weapons capability. But if you undercut the credibility of that, he won't go to Oman. And then President Trump is going to have to go to Fordo and drop the massive ordnance penetrators on the nuclear program. And if he doesn't do any of that, then the scenario that I laid out earlier will ensue, where Iran could get a nuclear weapon, and it really does permanent damage, lasting damage to President Trump, his legacy, and American power and credibility.
And alternatively, also, there is this technique that I don't think the isolationists and the far left protesters realize, which is if he can get the American population to turn against the American regime, in a sense, you can win the war that way if you can't win militarily, but create such a divide and stoke the flames of division within a country, then politically you lose the war that way. That's similar to Vietnam. We had Nick Freitas on talking about how the propaganda war really is what undercuts the military effort, so that even if America has the advantage or Israel has the advantage, if they can turn the West against itself, which he's effectively doing, I think the isolationists don't even realize to the extent they're playing right into that strategy, which is a very calculated effort to ensue doubt into the efforts of the West to minimize this regime.
I mean, you're exactly right. That's a great insight. And Khamenei, rap. Let's end with that. It's a great insight because that's exactly Khamenei's strategy. It's, by the way, it's the same strategy of Xi of China, Putin, Russia, and Kim of North Korea, right? They have been running massive influence operations against the United States. By the way, the Qataris are probably spending more money on that than anybody. But these powers have been running massive influence operations into the United States in order to intensify the existing fissures and fractures within American society, right? And they do that. They have different objectives, but at the end of the day, they have one common mission, and that is exactly right, is to sap the will of American society to defend America and as the bulwark against a growing Islamist, Chinese, Russian, North Korean threat. And they've been extremely successful. The crazy thing is, not only are we not defending ourselves against their influence operations, we don't run offensive influence operations against them. Certainly not against Iran, limited against China and Russia, and almost non-existent against North Korea. So while they are undermining our will to fight, we're doing nothing to undermine their will to fight. And I think the isolationists, as you say, are walking right into the trap that those powers have set for us. And in doing so, they are creating a situation where war is going to be more likely, right? Because this is the historical lesson that we should all learn. History doesn't repeat; it echoes. Everybody says that. But what happens is, with Churchill warning about the gathering storm, and the isolationists in America and in Britain and in other countries pushing back against that, right? If we had listened to Churchill and hit the Nazis early, we would have avoided a war that took tens of millions of lives. And World War II is not is not the only example, right? I mean, there's many examples in our history. The Iraq War, Al Qaeda are most recent examples. I mean, there never would have been an Iraq War or a war on terror against Al Qaeda if we had gone at Saddam and Bin Laden early. I mean, I just finished an amazing podcast.
Well, you're not done yet.
We're not done, not this one, but a podcast on Bin Laden and Al Qaeda. Really, like understanding this, going way back, and it is just heartbreaking. It is called. Oh boy,
we'll find it.
We'll
something classified. Yeah, it's. It's a great podcast, and
you're busy. She's jumping from one to the other, Michael.
Yeah, no, exactly. It'll come to me in a second. The number of times we missed the opportunity to take out Bin Laden and Al Qaeda, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking because we know what happened on 9/11, and almost 3,000 of our citizens were killed. That they would have been alive. They'd still be alive today if we had taken that opportunity and understood what Bin Laden and Al Qaeda meant and what the danger was, and hit them preemptively. But there were so many voices saying, don't do it, don't want to escalate.
Was it Clinton? Clinton who was saying, I should have killed him. I had the shot to kill him. I should have killed him.
Yeah. It was, it was Clinton. It really was in the 90s but it was, back in the 80s, but really the 90s where, Al Qaeda was hitting America. The Islamists were going after America, World Trade Center bombing and USS Cole and our embassies in Africa. And they were targeting us time and time again. And there were voices inside the Clinton administration saying, we have to hit them now. This is going to get worse. And there were a lot of loud voices saying, we can't do it. It'll escalate. And ultimately, we had 9/11 in the World Trade Center in ashes.
Michael, if I may, just sorry, I don't want to forget this one. There's you mentioned about the echoes of history, and it seems like a very difficult calculus to make. At which point in the sequence where if you look at the pattern of, post World War I, you have this wave of isolationism that makes World War II worse because we don't get involved at the right time or we don't take preventative measures. If you look at the echoes of history now, looking at the isolationist arguments today, currently the modern ones, they're looking at previous blunders, Iraq and Afghanistan, and these long entanglements in which America got dragged into these quagmires, and they went in for the standards not of self-defense, but of nation building. And they're echoing those arguments and those things. And I can kind of understand that, but not to say that not to go to war with Iran, the reason not to is because Iraq was a mistake. That seems like faulty logic there, but one can understand that. Should we have initially gone and confronted Iran after 9/11? Were they the real, facilitators of the terrorism that gave bin Laden the inspiration to attack, that saw America as a paper tiger for not responding to the Marine barracks and all of these issues? If you follow the long haul, to what extent are the mistakes of recent wars in the past that people are just kind of have PTSD from causing a lot of this isolationism today?
Well, look, I unlike Tucker Carlson and a number of other self-proclaimed isolationists, I did not advocate for the war in Iraq. I mean, I was working on Iran early on. I always thought that the real danger was from the Islamic Republic. That was a real danger to America, not from Saddam. And I'm not advocating for war, the United States to go to war with Iran right now, even though Iran has been at war with us for decades. I'm advocating for the U.S. to send a message to Khamenei so that he believes we're prepared to go to war. And that if he believes we're prepared to go to war, then it is more likely that he is willing to go to Oman or send his negotiator, Arakchi, to Oman and agree to a deal that will peacefully, fully, permanently dismantle his nuclear weapons program. That is my argument. If he's not willing to do that, then I worry that we cannot let Iran retain this key nuclear site that it can use to build nuclear weapons. And that's where either the U.S. military needs to do it, or we need to give the Israelis whatever they need to do it. Right? Mm-hmm. We could give the Israelis our B-2 bombers and massive Orange penetrators. I've been advocating for many months that we should get Israeli pilots to Missouri. We should train them up. We should put them in a B-2 bomber with 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrators. Before we let them fly, Trump should call a press conference. And he should say, Ali Khamenei, I have a message for you. I just married Israeli will with American capabilities. Our capabilities are awesome. And those Beautiful. Are pretty good pilots. So you have a choice. Meet me in Oman, do a peaceful deal, end your nuclear weapons program, fully dismantle, no enrichment, or I'm going to allow the Israelis to fly the B-2 bombers the way they fly American F-35s, F-16s, F-16s and 15s. I mean, we let them fly our planes. I mean, yes, we sell them. In this case, maybe we let the Israelis rent it and bring it back after a car wash. Nevertheless, we're going to give the Israelis what they need to do it. I mean, I would be perfectly fine with that. I think the Israelis would be perfectly fine with that. Let them fly the B-2s, 30,000-pound bombs, slice through Fordo, and destroy the nuclear weapons program without an American pilot's life at risk, without an American soldier's life at risk. Now, President Trump may say, you know what, if I'm going to do that, I want to do it. I want to do it. I want to take the credit. I want this to be an American victory. I want to be able to send a message of power and deterrence to American enemies after the disastrous withdrawal that Joe Biden engaged in from Afghanistan, which so undermined our deterrence and gave the green light to Putin to invade Ukraine, right? But I think that isolationists are making all of those choices more difficult, and in doing so, they're making war more likely.
In the marketplace for weapons, why hasn't Israel been able to purchase a B-2 bomber or the bombs they need?
Yeah, because there's no marketplace for strategic bombers. I mean, okay. I guess the Russians have strategic bombers. That the only other place that are the Chinese. But I mean, realistically, we've never sold our strategic bombers to anyone else. We've never leased strategic bombers to anyone else. We've never let others use our strategic bombers. So the Israelis don't really have an option. And haven't had an option. They've gotten, obviously F-35s and F-15s and 16s from us. They've made great modifications to them. They've got They've got superb pilots that have done extraordinary things with American military equipment, as President Trump acknowledged on Friday, when, the day after or a night after an incredible first night of Israeli operations, President Trump moved to try to embrace those victories and present them as an American win, and they were an American win. I mean, that's a result of President Trump providing Israel with military equipment. It's a result of President Trump being involved and leading and coordinating a brilliant deception campaign with the Israelis that literally and figuratively found the Iranians in their beds asleep, right? Which is why the Israelis were able to go in there with surprise and take out so many of these terrorist leaders and nuclear weapon scientists. And he was involved in that. And so America already deserves real credit for the success to date. And the only question for President Trump now is, how do you bring this to a successful resolution that's good for the United States? Can you do that peacefully in Oman, or are you going to do that militarily in Fordo? That really is the choice.
You really think Israelis would be able to function in Missouri? I feel like that would be a culture clash. Why can't we do New York or Miami, please? It's terrible. It's interesting that I lost my train of thought. I had a serious question. But
that's what happens when you tell a great joke, then you can't remember how to get serious.
I'm lost on stage, Michael. No, Michael, what do you have? Go ahead.
Well, I mean, this is just like a pastime of Amis and I. We only have a few minutes left, but we're on Twitter. We read tweets and we're like, "Oh, that's awful. That's awful. I wish I knew how to respond to it." And then when we have someone like you here, we like to just sort of like read a tweet and be like, "Mark, can you do it for us? Can you just like tell us how to respond to this like insane argument that we can't articulate?"
Lightning round.
Do you want to choose one and we'll wrap up here?
Lightning round here, and it's always funny. When the stuff when shit really hits the fan, when it really goes down and things get real, all of a sudden you find two things happen. This sort of noisemakers and people who are just kind of like cultural warriors here, building up these audiences, they kind of just sound like static noise, and like they're forced to admit, because so many people have been criticizing Israel for whatever reason they can, indiscriminately bombing Gaza, and then when they're so precise in Iran, as if they've said that's what they preferred them do, they just kind of glitch out, and then you have the people who stand with Israel, but then you have all these people who kind of, you realize all of their positions are just fodder for like building an audience. They're not on the border here. They don't face any of these consequences. So right off the bat, let's see, we got some of our greatest hits. Candace Owens, get ready, white American men. So, I thought she's all against making everything about race, but okay. Get ready, white American men. It's time for you to go die for Israel again. If you don't want to die for Israel, then you are an anti-Semite. Sign up to die in Iran for Netanyahu today, or just admit you hate Jews. Quoting Haaretz, Netanyahu is counting on Trump to finish what Israel started in Iran. Anything on that, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about that. I mean, I think it's very clear that Donald Trump can finish what Netanyahu started in Iran by the credible threat of military force that forces Khamenei back to Oman to negotiate a peaceful Senegalese deal. Candace Owens is making that less likely that Khamenei will get that message, because Khamenei won't believe that Trump will do it, because the Candace Owens of the world are criticizing him for threatening military force. And so what she's doing is she's undermining the president. She's making war more likely, not less likely. And she's going to be responsible if American men and women have to go to the Middle East and get involved in this war. It really is amazing to me how this isolationist echo chamber is literally undermining the president of the United States that they claim to support, not just American power and credibility, but really undermining Trump, undermining MAGA, and making it clear, as Trump has said, that he is America first. He invented America first, and an Iranian nuclear weapon would be a threat to America first.
Seems like Candace and Tucker are Candace Tucker first. I mean, it's pretty revealing in these kind of cases what they're trying to build. But I actually thought of the question I wanted to say before, which is you spoke about that if Khomeini could come to the negotiating table, then that's a desirable outcome and resolution to this. But then what's to stop everything from resuming if, God forbid, we get AOC 2028 or somebody like that, or another type of Biden or a weak candidate on the world stage or an Obama 2.0, and then everything just gets resumed again. So to what extent can the regime be left in place? Does Israel and the United States have different desires for that outcome, especially given this mass uprising in the Iranian moderate population? Like that's sustainable over the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there is a deal, I agree with you. That is how Khamenei will play it. He will kind of agree to something, wait 3 years, Trump is gone, God forbid AOC or Gavin Newsom or, some Republican isolationist. And then he will move to rebuild his nuclear infrastructure. I think that if there is a deal, and it's a good deal that strips him of that nuclear infrastructure, then I think the Israelis and the Americans need to double down on supporting the Iranian people. You now move into the next phase from maximum pressure to maximum support. And that's where the Iranian people will now see that their regime is not 10 feet tall. It's hollow ideologically, economically, and militarily. And now we take the Reagan strategy. Now it's about going there and really supporting anti-regime dissidents and figuratively or literally arming them with the kind of support they need. Labor strike funds, technology so that they communicate with internet blackouts. Elon Musk sends Starlink terminals now. I mean, he's now provided that after many years, which is very important. And we have put together a whole series of memos with hundreds of ideas about how you can support the Iranian people. At the same time, we should be running offensive influence operations against the regime and its support base. Right? And we should be intensifying the fractures and fissures inside the regime. 80% of Iranians despise the regime, 20% support it. Let's go after the 20% that support it and the 1% elite base and figure out ways to turn them on each other and intensify what is a Persian Game of Thrones inside the Islamic Republic, but really start to flip them against each other and do to them what they literally do to us every day. That becomes the next phase of a coordinated U.S. and Israeli strategy.
It sounds like a lot of the alternative arguments to the isolationism is that there exists reverberation, that anytime nothing exists in isolation, nothing exists in a vacuum, there are reverberating effects to all of these things, that when one actor acts, if we allow one aggressor to advance, China invades Taiwan, there's all these factors at play constantly. Everybody's watching the United States. Nefarious actors on the world stage are constantly watching to see how Israel or the United States engages with the world. So do you think that there's a reverberating effect seeing that so many assets were involved in this operation, that there's this real energy of people turning that are against the regime that can have a reverberating effect in actually ending the regime, especially after we saw what happened with Syria? Just like once you put the idea in somebody's heads or the reality in a population's head, this can actually happen. We don't just manifest this. Syria is no longer under Assad. This can happen. To what extent do you think that reverberation is real and tangible and actually has effects in the real world?
It's real. I mean, it's real because it's already happening. I mean, millions of Iranians were in the streets in 2009 yelling death to the dictator, right? President Obama, you with us, the dictator. President Obama writes a letter to the Ayatollah, wants to start nuclear negotiations. Regime crushes them. They go dormant. 2017, they're back on the streets. This time they're not in North Tehran Green Revolution saying, where's my vote after the fraudulent re-election of Ahmadinejad in 2009. They're blue-collar workers saying, where's my paycheck? Because they're suffering economically as a result of regime incompetence and sanctions which have been precipitated by regime terrorism and malign activities and nuclear weapons building. And they stay on the streets 2017 all the way to 2022. 2022, women of Iran come out and rip off their hijab, which is an existential threat to the Islamic Republic, which is built on hatred of America, hatred of Israel, and hatred of women. And the hijab, which is forced dress code that keeps them covered and enslaved. And they come to the streets and yell death to the dictator and the gender apartheid. And hundreds of thousands of Iranian women with their sons and brothers and fathers are on the streets. The regime comes and cracks down mercilessly and uses chemical weapons to attack Iranian schoolgirls to break the back of woman life freedom. And yet the Iranians keep coming back to the streets. Just before the recent strikes, a few days ago, Iranian truckers went on strike. Massive labor strikes throughout Iran. So all of that is there. I mean, that hatred of the regime is there, and it is just looking for support from the outside. so that when Iranians face off against the goons on the streets, they have both rhetorical support and they have material support, the way Reagan supported anti-Soviet dissidents. The fact that now Israel has gone in there and started to decapitate the senior leadership of the regime and gone after the Guard Corps and the Ministry of Intelligence and the regime intelligence apparatus. And by the way, they just took out the Islamic Republic of Iran broadcasting headquarters, which is known as torture TV because they always broadcast forced confessions of Iranians, right? You now start to see an opportunity where Iranians will say, well, actually, we may have the chance to recapture our country. I'll make one final point. This operation is called Operation Rising Lion, right? Now, Rising Lion from an Israeli biblical perspective, a lion in the Tanakh, where this, the most dangerous creature in the animal kingdom is the mother lion who is protecting her cubs. And when you threaten her cubs, that lion rises. And Israel has risen after October 7th. That I would say is that's sort of one interpretation. The second interpretation is that the flag of the pre-Islamic Republic of Iran, pre-1979 revolution, is a flag of the lion and the sun. And Netanyahu on Friday, in announcing this operation, used part of his speech to talk to the Iranian people about taking back their country. And in some respects, Operation Rising Lion is about taking back their flag and taking back their country. And so that is not just, Netanyahu being rhetorical. There is a concerted effort by the Israelis to help the Iranian people take back their country. And that ultimately is the only resolution that is permanent and long-term, and that'll guarantee that the Islamic Republic will not build nuclear weapons because the Islamic Republic will be there no longer. So, yes, that ultimately has to be the play over the horizon, but the short-term play is make sure that Khamenei does not get a nuclear weapon and finish the job decisively, either in Oman at the negotiating table or in Fordo with massive ordnance penetrators.
Yeah. Our two great nations since Cyrus the Great. I heard the speech, Mark. It was so, so beautiful. And rising like a lion.
Mark Dubowitz, thank you so much for providing insight. Any final thoughts, Michael? Questions, concerns?
I have questions. We're gonna let you go, but next time we talk, I want to know what it's been like for everything to just change overnight. You've been doing this for so long, and then all of a sudden everything changes.
And the dining room table turns to you like,
Mark, what do you think?
Mark, you were saying something about Iran. What were you saying?
Yeah, I'm anxiously optimistic. I guess I'm optimistically anxious. I've been working on this for 22 years. I've been sanctioned by Iran, threatened by Iran, have to have 24/7 security because of Iran. And I've been advocating for a long time for maximum pressure on the regime, maximum support for the people. I'm hopeful, but I'm cautious. I think that this is a very dangerous regime with still thousands of ballistic missiles and a willingness to intentionally murder Israelis and Americans and other people of the Middle East. So I am being cautious and I'm sort of curbing my enthusiasm, as it were. But I am also more hopeful than I've been in 2 decades of working on this. So.
Cool.
Cue the curb music. Glung, glung, glung. Mark Dubowitz, thank you so much of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, enlightening us here at Ami's house. What a schmooze. I feel very informed.
The name of your podcast one more time?
It's called the Iran Breakdown.
Iran Breakdown. Okay.
Yeah.
As the Iranian regime, it may break down, but we want you to stay safe so we can stop talking about it for now. Thank you so much, Mark. We appreciate your time. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.